Good morning. This morning's scripture reading, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 20 through 25. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God, through the foolishness of the message preached, to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But those who are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
Notice something in that passage, what's going on. In Corinth, in the time of Greek learning, we'll put it that way. Broad term in their lexicon during the day. They had a lot of learning, a lot of wisdom, and they were very bright individuals. But if you notice in the passage what's going on is, where are these people when it comes down to the hard evidence? Where is the scribe? Where's the learned? Where is the New King James translates it, disputer of this age? Where is the one who could stand up and debate? Who could break out his logic, his rhetoric? Who could tell by just his words that God God doesn't exist, nor has He ever. That somehow their wisdom is greater than God's. And those words should echo even in our minds today, because it still stands true. You're not going to find someone who's going to stand up and deny God and they can actually prove it by anything tangible. They can spout a lot of hateful words. They can spout maybe stats. They can spout a bad accident. They can spout a lot of different things. I've heard it, I'm sure you have as well, to so-called supposedly dispute God. But they fail because they fail to recognize the wisdom that is God. We looked at some things a couple of weeks ago, and we'll continue our look at understanding biblical faith. How to establish it, how to look at it, and to understand where we stand as children of God. Right? These sermons are directed at us, at the church. And as such, we need to understand, just as we looked at a couple of weeks ago, of folks that are agnostic, folks that don't fully believe, don't line up where God lines up. We're going to look today at sometimes at how it is that some folks simply don't line up with God on other areas as well. And those who profess to be Christians. And the areas we look at today and throughout this series are areas in which God's people have had trouble for years and still do. Our faith sometimes wavers. There are things that come in. What I want to look at today is some of the causes of unbelief or doubt, if you want to call it that. What causes people to doubt their faith in God, in the Bible, in Christianity itself, and organized religion, as we like to hear a lot. But what causes those things? So let's go through this today and look at a few things together. This comes up a lot by doubters. And it permeates the ears and then the minds and then the hearts of Christian people. If God is just, righteous, loving, almighty, if God is all of these things, beneficent, benevolent, then why do these things happen? Why do we have evil? Why do we have pain? Why do we have suffering in the world? Notice the very question itself poses doubt, does it not? If. Did you hear that? One of the biggest little words in the language, I do believe, in language itself. If. It automatically opposes doubt. And what you have, when you look at this, when Christians start coming up with the same thing. Why does God allow these things? Let me ask us a question, folks. Christians, let me ask us a question. If, because of evil, pain, and suffering, we doubt God, do we really think those three things are going to go away if we abandon God? Do you really think so, church? Because if you do, you're saying God does exist, by the way. Did you hear me? We're actually saying God does exist. Because when I leave that, now everything's better. There's no more pain, no more evil, no more suffering. Let me tell you something. Pain, evil, and suffering has been part of this world since the beginning and will always be. But one of the reasons that Jesus came is to alleviate those things, to make them easier to understand, to deal with, to tolerate, and understand something not only in this life but in the beyond. And as Christians, when we start doubting about it and wonder about evil, wonder about pain, wonder about the suffering, how these things come about, one thing we need to stop and realize, folks, and look at what God has to say about all of them. You know, the Bible says there in James chapter 1 and verse 17, talking about God, talking about sin in particular, that God doesn't bring any of these things on us. God doesn't tempt us with evil, He says earlier, nor can He be tempted by any man. Because every man is drawn by his own lust and enticed. Then it turns into sin. But here's the illustration that He uses, the idea of God not turning His back, quite literally. Every good and every perfect thing comes from above, the Father of lights. And let's stop for just a moment. Father, the generator of lights. Of light. What does light stand for in the New Testament? Good. Perfection. Used here very clearly, right? God gives all things that are good and perfect. They come from above. If something is bad and imperfect in our life, where did it come from? Satan. That's right. You think God gives us bad things? You think God makes bad things happen? He does allow those things to happen, but He doesn't bring them upon us. When I know that everything good and perfect comes from above, from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither shadow made by turning, He doesn't turn His backs on us. Did you hear what God said, folks? God doesn't turn His backs on us. Even when evil happens, even when pain happens, even when suffering happens. You know, there's not an exclusion to that verse that, well, when it gets bad, then He turns around. If you've got that footnote, let me encourage you to scratch through it because somebody lied to you. That's not what God does. That's not what God has ever done. He is there standing strong. You go back to Joshua 24:15. They were about to enter the promised land, and what does He tell them to do? Make up your mind. Choose you this day whom you will serve. You want to stay with the gods on the other side of the river? Back in the land of all of the hate, all of the falsities, all of the things that never brought you out of your pain and suffering. You want to stay there? That's your choice. Which brings up another principle of the evil, pain, and suffering. We make choices sometimes, don't we? It's your choice, but listen to what Joshua says. As for me and my house, we know it. We will serve the Lord. And that means no matter what. In the face of evil, can you find a better time to serve the Lord? In the face of pain, suffering, I challenge you to find a better way or a better time. There was a young lad in high school in the mid-1960s, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he was very devout in his Christian faith. He had Bible studies on the school grounds. Well, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Like 150 years ago, right? He had Bible studies on campus, the day when you could actually be a Christian and not be beaten down for it physically and other ways too. And he was going to be a missionary. He couldn't wait to do it. Tragedy struck. Sister died very young, horribly. Soon after that, his father committed suicide, too much to handle. Evil, pain, and suffering, after all, right? And the boy's faith turned on a dime. I can't do this. Look at what God has let happen. And again, please notice when you admit something like that, you're admitting that it exists. not in the right light, but you're admitting that it exists. Turned away, and the boy's name was Ted Turner. You ever heard of him? Turner Broadcasting System, TBS, CNN. Now you know why they're so left with their views, right? When you have a very ungodly man at the helm. And these things can happen, and they can happen to good people sometimes full of faith, and that's why I'm looking at this as from the church's standpoint. To not be so beat down, if you will, by the world. To not be so defeated by things that happen. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13 says that temptation, or literally all things that tempt us or that are bad, such, he says, is common to man. How dare me or anyone else think that what I have is worse than you? What gives us that right? Because my life is bad, somehow it's worse than your life? Just because I don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, does it? These things happen. But the pity party breaks out, and all of a sudden, oh, woe, woe, woe is me. I've got this, my health is this, and this is this, and this is this. Rather than taking advantage of those things and learning how to deal with it and move on in life, we reach back there. You ever seen the boxing ring? Where the trainer or the manager has had enough of watching this boy get beat down? And that white towel flies in the ring. No moss. He used to say, no more, right? The boy's had enough. He can't see as it is. But Christians, we shouldn't have a towel even on hand. Because we're going to be beat up. We're going to see evil, pain, and suffering. Sorry to break the news. And I tell people this before I baptize them. I want them to know what they're getting into. I told you before, they say, do I need to become a Christian? Are you trying to talk me out of it? I say, not at all. I just want you to know what you're getting into. Just because I put on Jesus Christ in baptism does not mean that the world, I'm somehow immune to the world. That I have a veneer across me that things are going to just bounce off of me. What it means is that I have a way out. Listen back again in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. God has provided a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. To stand against the load, quite literally, the idea of bearing down on us. You can buckle up and stand strong. God has provided the way. By the way, His name is Jesus, in case you missed it. He's given us a way to stand against the load of this life. Does it mean it's always going to be easy? It's probably never going to be easy. Let me burst some more bubbles. But it's certainly going to be worth it. I believe now, and certainly in the hereafter, but I believe now too, that we can endure those things. Welcome a little pain and suffering once in a while. It's good for you. Let you know you're alive, right? We see these things happen, and they're going to be there whether we like it or not. And like I said earlier, you can abandon God all you want to, but you're not going to find any relief from these three. We see a man, devout father, husband, 3 young children at home, deacon in the Lord's church. Terrible accident, freak accident. Should have never happened. No way in 1,000 years could it happen again. And he dies. And we ask, why? How? We like to question, don't we? What's going on? A week later, a man of the same age, no family, or he did have one, but he abandoned them. He is a reprobate of the first rank in every conceivable way. Same freak accident and dies. Oh, wow, that's terrible. It seems worse when it happens to good people, doesn't it? Why do bad things happen to good people? Let me tell you something, folks, that happen to bad people too. The same thing. Such is common to man. Did you hear what God said again? We're not going to alleviate the pain and suffering if we get away from God. And I'm here to tell you right now, it's going to get worse. The questions we had when we were Christians and following the way of Jesus Christ are going to grow exponentially. People try to find relief. booze, alcohol, drugs, you name it, whatever they want to find. And they find the spiral into oblivion grows, grows, and grows. And the only remedy for all of it, folks, is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's it. That's what Paul's statement was a moment ago in 1 Corinthians, was it not? That's why He sent Jesus Christ, to get us out of that pit of misery, not to put us back into it, but to pull us out. These things are going to happen, but trust me, as you well know, they happen to everyone. One of the causes of unbelief is not just Richard Dawkins, that's his mugshot. That's a little intimidating too, right? Maybe just scary, I don't know. Listen to what he said. This is one of many, by the way. We could be here all day with him and others. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody, he should have said someone, but anyway, somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or his parenthetical statement I really like, or wicked. But I'd rather not to consider that. Richard Dawkins is an atheistic evolutionary professor in Oxford. He has made a big name for himself for a number of years as opposing theism, the belief in God. And that is a very short and a very kind, believe it or not, kind summation of what he thinks of us. And a lot of people echo the same thing. Now notice please the intellectual part of this intimidation. Notice that he has a trio and he sticks on number 4 just for good measure. Funny he mentions it, but he'd rather not consider it. In other words, I do want to consider it. Ignorant. That's a word that's tossed around a lot today, and he used it as a rhetorical device in a wrong manner. But ignorant means unknowing or unlearned about something. Stupid. Well, there's a really nice term. We tell our kids not to say that one. Don't you call somebody stupid. Smack you down for that one, right? Or, I like this one, insane. If I don't believe in organic evolution, if I say that that is not right, from a common sense perspective, and I do, from a scientific perspective, and I do, from any other perspective, I don't believe in that because it simply is, it's false on the face of it. Popped out of nothing. Popped out of a single cell. Popped out of this. Grew lung. Grew this. Please. If I say that, I can be insane. Because I disagree with Mr. Dawkins. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there are people in this world that if you disagree with them, you're instantly wrong. I've run into somebody like that. Anybody else? The list is about this long, right? You don't agree with me, you're wrong. And this is the intellectual intimidation that we see. This is one of many. The picture is that if you don't believe in what we say and what the majority, and the majority, by the way, is a loaded figure, by the way. When they say the majority of scientists, no, wait a minute. Let's use their nomenclature. The majority of recognizable scientists, the majority of reliable scientists, all agree that organic evolution is the way this world came into existence. Did you hear a couple of words in there that are used to slant the view? If I disagree, I'm not reliable. If I disagree, I fall into these realms, or even wicked. I can't imagine being wicked because I don't believe in organic evolution. But that's what people say, and many others. And it's meant as a highbrow method to intimidate us. You're going to believe what I say because I said it. There. Fear emoji. A scientist came up with something. Ask them to explain it, then it really gets wild. Well, it's this, and it's this, and this. Then you ask questions in the middle of it. Well, how did this come about? Well, this came about from this. Well, where did this come about? You ever talk with an evolutionist? You get dizzy. You get dizzy. Looking around, they talk about we can't explain. Let me tell you something about explanation. Hold their feet to the fire, folks. Don't let someone intellectually intimidate you because all the reliable scientists say this. I want a list. Serious? You know what I can show you? Scores now, and growing all the time, of reputable scientists, well, they used to be, but when they moved away from organic evolution as the only means in which life came into existence, all of a sudden, they're one of these four things he says here. 30 years they've been reputable scientists, awards running out their ears. And when they change their mind by looking at the evidence, Michael Behe, you ever heard of him? B-H-E, Darwin's Black Box and other things, others have come out for years now. 20 years they've been coming out as opposed. And you know why they did it? This is funny. They'll say that Christianity is closed-minded, that faith does not equate knowledge, right? That's the series. That faith doesn't equate knowledge, and we can't examine clear evidence. You know what these guys do? PhDs in microbiology, PhDs in mechanical engineering for 20 and 30 years. You know what they find out? The evidence just isn't there. The evidence is for a design, which we're going to look at in just a moment. Charles Darwin came out, well, Charles Darwin borrowed heavily. Let's be honest. Borrowed heavily from folks before him and came up with evolution, or really a better term is organic. Living things changing, right? Inorganic rocks don't change, so what have you. Organic evolution. Organic evolution, which teaches that we grow and we start with a single cell and it grows to this and et cetera, and we just evolve into something else over time. A lot of things to talk about. We're not going to talk about all that today, but I want to talk about something from intellectual bias. And we get this even within the Lord's church quite a bit. And it's called theistic evolution. That is, you have Christian men and women that study, and they go and study science in universities. And in time, when they are beaten down with reliable scientific data says this, the best scientists in the world all say this, that we came from a primordial soup. And that's the way it is. You want to pass my exams, that's what you're going to put down there. You're going to turn in a paper from my class, that's what you're going to put in there. And all this bias is there, and the intimidation is still there. So what they say is, well, I don't want to fully give up my faith, but you know, evolution has been proven true, not by study or experiment, because no one's a million years old, right? There goes scientific method, by the way. But by what we gather from guessing and going in all these other directions, and all the other professors like it, so let's just go with that. So what they come up with is what's called theistic evolution. Theistic having the idea of God, evolution, of organic evolution. And they say, well, God did it, but He did it by means of evolution. That is, and this is pervasive sometimes in the church. And if you're here today, let's talk. I'm game. Let's look at what God says about it. Let's look at what the scientists say about it. Let's look at the evidence that's presented. I'm not a stranger to critical thinking, no matter what people like to say. Are you? Don't we like to look at the evidence? You know, when the Bible teaches us about the creation events in the first couple of chapters of Genesis and elsewhere too, it's very specific in Genesis chapter 1 that the evening and the morning were the first day. Evening and the morning, that's why they reckon time. It's a 24-hour day. But there are people that go between the gaps and the first chapter there and say, no, those are eons of time, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of years, we just don't know. Well, I ask them, the question comes up again, I'm talking about a theistic evolution. If I'm theistic, I say I believe in God, right? Which means I believe what God's book says. Then how did that happen over eons of time, and why was a day then, for some reason, eons and not anymore? The Hebrew word comes up a lot, Y-O-M, yom. And they'll say, but that can mean other time, mean epochs of time, if that's what we want, if that's what the text determines. I agree. If the text determines that. You look at the scholars and they'll all say, unless it says otherwise, it means 24 hours. Welcome to Common Sense 101. Welcome to reading with your eyes wide open rather than wide shut, as sometimes we're asked to do. 24-hour day. We understand about this. The plants, the animals, these things. You know, plants, some of those plants wouldn't survive for eons without sunlight. Or without there are other things that come along. But here we go again, thinking, what's wrong with us? Why are we doing this? Because we'll walk by faith, right? Not by sight. Doesn't that mean we walk without reason? Say no. Don't get caught up in the moment and say yes. No. We walk by reason. That's what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue understanding these things. In Exodus 20, verse 11, we have there in the Ten Commandments, God says to Moses that in 6 days God created everything. Period. 6 24-hour days. He didn't kick the world off into existence, push it off and say, okay, eventually it's going to evolve into just what I want it to be. That's deism. That says that God created the world and backed up and hasn't touched it since, which means Jesus didn't really do His miracles. These things happen to Christian people, folks. Don't be deceived. These things happen to Christian people and say, oh, well, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. We abandon reason. We want to go in these directions. We leave it off to the side. And in a sense, in the process, we abandon God as well. You know, when Jesus, especially in Mark 10, verse 6, talking about marriage in particular, when they start bringing controversies to Him, He says very clearly that since the beginning, God created them male and female. Did you hear what He said? Beginning. Not a million years in, then He says, okay, now I'm going to make man. The Bible says from the very beginning of time, He created them male. Listen, created, not evolved. Did you notice what He said? That's the way God said it. If I look at it that God just let everything evolve, we're taking away from the omniscience of God. We're taking away from the power of God. God spoke and it was. It commanded and it stood fast, according to Psalm 33, 6 and 9. God made this world and the way He wanted to. Not any other direction. He commanded and it stood fast. There's nothing even intimates in all of Holy Writ that says that God just kind of made it as He wanted to and it evolved into some kind of weird thing and eventually here it is. Folks, that's just evolution. You throw God's name in there you want to, but you don't change the premise of it. That somehow everything, this immaculate universe in which we dwell, all the beings, not just human, evolved perfectly. Give me a break. I don't buy it. Not for a second, because God's not selling it. Let's look at this as well. In our educational system, we have seen for a number of years, and it's getting worse, especially at the university level. High schools are doing it too. I've talked to high schoolers, I know. And in science classes, it's no longer a theory, it's a fact. It's just like we looked at with Richard Dawkins earlier. It's just like Bill Nye the Science Guy. You are just an ignorant buffoon if you don't believe in these things. Well, let me tell you something, Bill. That's not the way to convert somebody. You don't tell somebody they're stupid and hope they're going to convert. That's just not the way to do it. What I want to do is understand something about this. And I have up there intelligent design. That's been around for a number of years. And it's always, always, always dismissed by that upper echelon of elitists that say, well, that's just religion. That's not science. Let me ask you something. When I start looking into a cell, when I start looking into just a cell, we're not talking about the entirety of the human anatomy or anything else, the endocrine system, all the things that we possess. And that's just on the human side. How about animals? How about nature? How about the world? How about oxygen levels? How about all these things? You mean to tell me that was a fluke? Scientists will look into it and they'll say, the ones I'm telling you about that are really honest will say, There's no way every single thing happened by chance. There is design in us. And notice, please, design implies a designer. We looked at before. But it is intelligent design. And they are working hard to debunk it. Let me tell you how leftists, it doesn't matter if it's political, educational, religious, whatever they are. Here's their argument against anything. That's stupid. Good, sound reasoning. Plato would be proud, would he not? Socrates would love it. That's stupid. Oh, I'm defeated. Let me back up. You called me stupid. You called me names. And I'm not kidding. That is what we see for the most part. They're lying, in case you didn't know. Of course we knew. We're not stupid, right? We know these things aren't right. And we look around at nature around us. We looked at Psalm 19 before. We understand intelligent design. How can I look and say it happened? Well, what a fluke. Would you look at this building and say, what a fluke? How'd those beams get up there? They just fell. One of those crazy winds came down out of the mountains and boom. The glass, that was amazing to watch. Took 10 million years, so we can't show you any pictures, but you just have to trust us on it. Right? Intelligent design is real. And real scientists will tell you that it is too. But do we really need all that? Understanding biblical faith is understanding that what we read is right because it's proven all around us, what we see. And the Bible's way is right. Or as Paul said, God's foolishness. And he uses that tongue in cheek, right? It seems foolish to the rest of the world. But God did it. God brought these things into existence. And let's close with this. I tried to find the source. I had this quote and I couldn't find it. So anyway, he was a pretty smart fella, I think, or lady, whoever it was. People do not generally disbelieve in God because of intellectual causes as much as moral and psychological. I agree. To say that, well, God is an immoral, irrational being is just something they throw on top as icing on the cake. What they don't like. There's a reason why Darwin's Origin of Species sold out in 1856 and on one day, all 1,000 some odd copies, because it was something different than God. I don't believe they thought all that stuff was true, but it was something else besides having to follow God and live by His moral code. And to live by the rationalistic ideas that He gives us throughout Scripture. And to live a better life. If I'm living morally, I don't have all the junk that people that live immorally do. I don't have sexually transmitted disease. I don't have alcoholism. I don't have drug addiction. I don't have unwanted pregnancies. I don't have all these things. Did you notice that? That's what they call stupid actually shows smart. Brilliant. We can avoid all those things for it. And I think about there in Colossians 2 and verse 8, a warning there of how things were going in his day. And if you notice, that verse applies just as much today as it did 2,000 years ago. There is a warning. Be aware, quite literally. Be aware of the things around us. They're going to cheat us out of our soul. Cheat us out of our soul through philosophy and empty deceit. Here's the thing. Philosophy is a good word. It means lover of wisdom. That's it. But the philosophy he's talking about is when it sounds really good. And people have always been able to do that. You go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and that's exactly what he's dealing with. They had schools of oratory, schools of rhetoric, schools of learning that were greatest among the world. Rhodes scholars, we still talk about those guys, right? From the Isle of Rhodes now, or used to be. These Rhodes scholars, that's where they had their origin, way back when. And they could stand up and make anything sound good. First salesman. They'd sell you a bill of goods and you couldn't wait to write the check. Paul says, beware of that. You know what we have? We have something that we can prove that what we do is right. We have something that is proven as superior. And the Bible has been proven for centuries, quite literally, to be right. Empty charges mean nothing to me. Give me some evidence. Stand up and let's see it. I told you before, these folks don't like to go to the polemic, don't like to stand on a stage and debate these issues. Not when they can stand back and browbeat us. And people say, oh no, they're smart and I'm not. Don't buy that deception. The devil tried in the very beginning and it worked. No, you misunderstood. You know what? Hear what he's saying? You're not smart enough, Eve. Let me interpret that for you. That's literally as old as time. Let's not be brought in by that. What do you say? Let's not be caught up in that empty deceit, tradition of men, principles of the world. All those things are there. But rather, let's look to Jesus. Let's look to the evidence. I'll be the first one to tell anybody, private or public, and I've done it often, to look to the evidence. What does the evidence say? And I don't mean just the Bible. But what does evidence say? What does reason say? What does the science, what does other things say that we see that we can understand? And we do it, folks. And we look at the evidence with that open mind. You know what we see? You still see Jesus. You thought I was going to say something else, didn't you? You still see Jesus. You still see God. You still see power. And you still see relief from the evil, pain, and suffering. You still see relief from all the things that have plagued mankind since the beginning. And I'm not going to find it in statements of Richard Dawkins or of anyone else. I'm not going to be browbeat to think that I'm stupid or insane or wicked or anything else because I don't believe the way someone else does. Folks, I'm going to look at it with that rational mind that God gave us. And I'm going to do the right thing. I don't want to go along, so are you with me? A couple of you are. That's good. Nice. 2 of you going to heaven with me. Congratulations. Good day today, right? I'm going to say yes and help all you bashful folks out. We need to talk about that one of these days too, about being silent. And I don't mean just an assembly, but the church being silent. But we understand these things, and folks, listen. That's what we do to find life now and to find it in eternity, is to understand the evidence God has given. There's a reason we have a great big book called the Bible. He didn't want us to be, if He wanted us to be unlearned and ignorant, He wanted us to walk on a blind faith, He wouldn't have given us something this big. He wouldn't have given us something so filled. He wouldn't have given us a rational mind. We'd have been automatons, like robots, following God around, and that's not the way we are. We can choose. Why don't you choose this day? Why don't you choose to follow God? Choose to follow the evidence that's presented, not today only, but throughout our lives, throughout the history of the world, and look at the great I Am. Look at what He's done. Understand His power, His majesty. Could speak the world into existence. People say, oh, that's ridiculous. Well, it's better than a big bang out of nothing. Divine fiat means a lot more than something else that people come up with. The ever-evolving way the universe came into existence, right? Evolutionists just start with life. They cheat. They do. You start with life. Wait a minute, you got to tell me how life got here first. Life came from God. There, I said it. The soul came from God. There, I said it. Salvation comes from God via Jesus Christ. I said it again. And I would say it in front of the largest panel of atheists you could find. I don't care. Do you? Pluck up the courage, folks. We've got to do it. And it puts us in Christ, that faith. We submit to water baptism because God says we've got to do it. And our faith continues to grow. Jesus freed me from my sins, did He not? Jesus gives me new life in Christ and God the Father. And Jesus is going to give me that place in heaven. Because He promised to do so, and God never fails on His promise. Never. Mankind will fail you. Over and over and over. They'll fail you. God doesn't. If anyone has need today of the invitation, why don't you come now while we stand and while we sing.